Mike Williams here. He's the senior executive of player personnel at Ole Miss. Before you ended up at Ole Miss, you also have a pretty storied career being an NFL scout yourself and then working your way up that organizational ladder within the NFL. And we would love to just get some insight as to how the whole machine works, and especially leading up to the NFL draft, what's going on within organizations and how people approach that. So, Mike, welcome to the show.
Appreciate it.
It seems to be a family podcast. Nick has his brother on every episode. I bring on my dad and my uncles.
Family show. I'm just wondering how you got into this football world. Like I think you dove into scouting. You start off as a scout with the 49ers, like back in the 2000s, early 2000s. What drew you to this world, and what was it like when you first got in it?
Well, it goes back to just me and coach in high school, and it's I had a connection of a guy that I went to college with. I was coach in high school, and then I coached a little bit in college. I was a linebacker coach at Southern Utah. And then I was a defensive coordinator at a junior college. And one of the guys that I was from the Santa Clara University football program that I knew, his father was a longtime defensive coach for Bill Walsh in the 49ers. So when he retired, they wanted to keep him around, so they moved him over to the personnel department, and he was starting the pro department there. And he needed some help, so he brought me in as an intern right around 1999. Worked a little while as an intern while I was teaching high school, and they hired me full time in 2000. At that time, Bill Walsh was the general manager, and then he retired, and Terry Donahue took over as the general manager. At that time, we were a pretty good team going to the playoffs. Jeff Garcia was a quarterback. I ended up spending 10 years as a pro scout for the 49ers. And then I went to St. Louis with the Rams for 4 years. I was the pro director of scouting. And then the vice president of player personnel with the Rams. We had a down season on the strike year, and we all got fired. It was Steve Spagnuolo, who's recognized a lot by a lot of people as as maybe the best defensive coordinator in the NFL right now. He was the head coach. He got fired, and it was kind of a cleaning house thing. So I came back to the 49ers for 5 years. And then the new group came in, and I started working for an agent, Don Yee, who represents a number of head coaches, Harbaugh, Jim Harbaugh, Sean Payton, Mike McCarthy. He's most famous for representing Tom Brady for his entire career. So I worked with him on a number of projects, and then this job at Ole Miss came back up, and I wanted to get back with the team and learn a little bit about, I wanted to get into college football. Sounded like a great opportunity. And so I'm learning the landscape, but also trying to bring some of the processes of scouting, personnel acquisition that we used in the NFL, and just trying to bring a different perspective. So.
Well, that's something that I think, Scott, we really want to get into, is kind of like bringing some of the experiences that you had in the NFL to college, especially in this era of college where we've got the transfer portal and it's looking a little bit different than college football used to get. I do want to get into that, but I do also want to rewind a little bit, going back to like your first 10 years as a scout. What is that like? What is the day-to-day life like of a scout? What are the ups and downs of that job? Because from the outside, it sounds pretty glamorous. Like, oh, you're a scout for the 49ers, an NFL team. But what's the inside like?
NFL teams have probably 8 to 10 college scouts. And then in-house, they have 4 guys that focus, typically 3 guys probably, that focus just specifically on pro scouting for most of the year. Start with a calendar as a pro scout. If I start the year when camp starts, let's say we start in August, that's when everybody comes back from summer break, which is 3 or 4 weeks in July, and we're ready to start camp. We're trying to assess other rosters. So I'll spend once those preseason games start coming in, I start evaluating along with the other pro scouts. So we start evaluating other teams' rosters and getting prepared for the 53-man cut down. And we're building a board based on who we think is going to become available, and also learning about what plays in the NFL. So getting real familiar with that cutoff line, because we got to build a practice squad after the 53-man cut down.
Yeah.
And a lot of your replacements come from your own practice squad, but they also come from other people's practice squads. So if we have an injury on the 53-man roster, we got to be ready to say who we're going to go after. Are we going to promote somebody from our practice squad? Or are we going to try to poach somebody from another practice squad? Or are we going to go to some veteran that's on the street? Nowadays, they let veterans be on practice squads, but back then the veterans weren't allowed to be on practice squads. And I forget what the cutoff was. It was so many accrued seasons. But we always had to be ready with a list of names at every position. And that was our emergency list about, who was available, who's the best, and our rankings. And we typically would have separate rankings. So who's a young developmental guy, the best young developmental guy at this position, or who's the best veteran that can come in and play right away. Keeping up that emergency list basically took us through rewinding a little bit towards the end of August and the approach of the 53-man cut down. That was a very intensive time for me, and the other pro scouts. We were really grinding a lot of tape. It's a lot of games and a lot of players coming in and out of those preseason games. And we would because those guys that are young guys, developmental guys, they didn't get into regular season games. They were trying to establish themselves in the NFL world. They weren't getting into regular season games, so there are no evaluations of the regular season games. We had to evaluate them based on the preseason competition, and they were in and out of games, and they're rotating guys by quarters. So you'd have to make assessments on sometimes as little as 17 plays, or stuff like that. So where a lot of times we're looking at traits, to show where they could go, what their ceiling was, basing that, the physical traits, as opposed to their football instincts, and making long-term projections. And so we'd established that emergency list. That would take us through basically and try to maintain that as best we can as attrition comes, because that emergency list gets thinner and thinner as the year goes on. We get to the end of December, and we would have our unrestricted free agent meetings. We're building a board based on the regular season tape that we watch, and we're building a separate board of unrestricted free agents for the dawn of free agency, which is the beginning of March, typically right after the combine. And so who do we want to go after as far as big dollar guys, guys that have been established in the league, whose first contract is up or second contract is up. So that's, and then also restricted free agents. There wasn't a whole lot of movement with restricted free agents, but it was mostly unrestricted free agents to fill in major holes in our roster that, and this whole time we're also assessing our own roster, which is a huge part of it. You got to know what's in your building, and that's one of the things that we're really emphasizing here at Ole Miss. You got to know what's in your building before you know what it is that you want to go out and acquire as far as any player acquisition. Whether it's street free agents, unrestricted free agents, or the college draft. That would take me us through the beginning of March. Once the beginning of March hits, we jump in and try to help out with the college draft, a little bit of cross check, and that would take us basically through the draft. And then we're almost all the way through the year. So that's the majority of the job. That's the calendar year for a pro scout. The college scouts, they're on the road all fall, a lot of travel. A lot of hotels, gathering information. A lot of it is background information of what type of person is this player, um, so or prospect, and they're real busy. And then they do all-star games, they do the combine. They would come in a couple weeks prior to the draft, and answer specific questions about any prospects in their area. So that's kind of the difference between the two. So
Sounds like it's better to be a pro scout than a college scout on the road all the time.
there is a trade-off. Now, those
Yeah.
guys, when when their time is off,
Yeah.
they're off.
Okay.
They're at home with their family. They got full days, maybe a week or two at a time. So, it is. I would say it's a little more challenging with the road travel is tough.
I can imagine. But going back to the NFL scouting part, I know you're hyper focused on everybody that's in the NFL, on squads, potentially on squads or practice squads. But does that expand out into other professional leagues? So like the CFL,
Yes.
whatever's out there, the XFL,
Mhm.
UFL, whatever it is, like you have to have your eyes on those players as well.
Yeah. Now, it's for the most part, those guys are picked over. You find a few gems in the CFL and occasionally the Arena League. But in theory, those people should be in 90-man camps. When camp starts, they should be on 90-man rosters if everybody's scouted appropriately, just because it's more money and a better opportunity.
Right.
There's a hierarchy, obviously. But yeah, you would find gems, somebody that stands out in a CFL season, which begins in the spring. Some surprises, and you got to be aware of those as well. Yeah.
How difficult is that to actually analyze a player that's maybe really performing well in the CFL or some of these lower tier leagues to be like, okay, this guy could actually be an NFL player?
It is tough, because it's a little bit different game. The competition level is a little bit different. So you basically have to dominate up there in
Yeah.
the CFL to get a good look. But you'll hear a lot of buzz throughout the league about, oh, so and so is being looked at by the league, and then you'll evaluate just the guys that rise to the top of that league. And even those guys that rise to the top of that league and that are getting looks from the NFL, they might be looked at by 6 or 7 teams.
Yeah.
Because what happens is if that guy's as good as somebody you already have on your roster, as if he's the same as somebody on your roster, you typically won't make the move unless you have a need for the numbers at the position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And expanding that out, even so, like we just heard breaking news, we heard the news that the Panthers were looking into a former basketball player, signing him on as tight end. It seems to be like that is a growing trend. Obviously, there have been many throughout the NFL history, Tony Gonzalez being one, Antonio Gates being probably the most prominent of all of them. How do you see that as a growing trend? And does that fall within the camp of NFL, call it player scouts themselves? Like, do they also have to, on top of CFL, UFL, Arena League, NFL, do they also have to look for those opportunities?
Yeah, the basketball player, most of the time it only applies to the tight end position.
Yeah.
Occasionally you'll see a lineman that might come from track and field, something like that. But as you guys know, you played football, instincts are so important, it's just that basketball seems to translate to the tight end position very well. A lot of those movements, and it's almost like what I always tell people too, when you're evaluating football players, it's almost like you have 22 different positions that are on the field at the time, right? It's almost like those guys are playing 22 different sports. What I mean? And they're so different, because what you do as a safety, it's nothing like what the guy does. It's nothing like the body type, and what that guy is trying to do as an offensive lineman. You don't have to anchor versus a bull rush, for example. Making an open field tackle is quite a bit different than, even pass protection. So, and I've, there's a lot of quarterbacks in the league that have never blocked or tackled anybody in their life. You
Yeah.
know,
This
yet
is
they're the highest paid player on the field. So they vary quite a bit from position to position. So it's almost like I always felt like some of the best scouts, some of the best evaluators had a varied background in their athletic experience. They could look at things through different, so somebody with a basketball background or a track and field background or whatever the sport, even baseball, a lot of those things, it just gives you a broader perspective, I think.
That's so interesting. I mean, we heard Tom Brady say a couple weeks ago, like, yeah, I had all this fantastic, successful career in the NFL, but I couldn't start a high school football game at any position other than quarterback, probably. It's just so specific of what you're doing. That brings me to the question. Maybe it's a stupid question, but I'm just curious about it. Is it more difficult to evaluate and feel confident about certain positions, or is there one position that's especially troubling or harder to have a confidence level when you're analyzing a player?
I think it varies from person to person,
Okay.
and their experiences. But I think you learn a lot from the other people that you're working with, and if as a scout, or I would recommend this to any scouts, just keep your ears open, your mouth shut for as much as you can, because there's a lot of I was fortunate enough in this business to learn from a lot of really good people,
Yeah.
and my understanding and um, evaluation skills, I think, were definitely enhanced by the people that I was around. So, uh, like I played the same as you, Nick. I was a safety, linebacker, that type thing. It's what I felt most comfortable with when I was starting. But I feel like um, I've definitely, my understanding of what to look for has gotten
Yeah.
a lot better at other positions as I've progressed through the years. So it's just exposure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to that point too, I mean, yes, you played those positions in football, but you were also a basketball player. You also played all the other sports as well. So to your point about like having that ability to just uh, analyze athleticism in general is such a weapon that I didn't even think about in terms of how
Mhm.
guys go about evaluating. Now,
Yeah.
in the process of this, are there within the league, are there scouts who are just, because you get the position coaches who are just gurus, right? So dad played under Coach Mudd, who was just the
hmm
line guru of coaches and everything like that. Are there scouts that kind of have, hey, these guys know exactly how to evaluate this one or two positions really, really well, and that's just what they focus on? Or NFL scouts, are they having to generalize across the board?
Yeah, the NFL scout, there's no specialists in that. They have to evaluate
Mm,
every position. They're expected to evaluate every position. Now, uh, there's some NFL organizations that have had a lot more people hired from their place than other
mm,
NFL, because of the success that they had, So um, I would say there's a handful of NFL teams that are recognized as doing things really well. The Baltimore
mm.
Ravens, sustained success, and so people are going to tend to try to grab people from when they have an opening. They're going to try to grab people from their organizations, but yeah, it's not specific to a specific position. Uh, you're expected to grow, you know,
Mhm.
into uh, all areas, and you're expected to gather information on every player. It's interesting that you brought up Tom Brady because I think he was a catcher in baseball, which is kind of in that sport, it's the field general of catchers. So something
Ah,
in that guy's makeup. We talk
interesting.
about applying different sports. I think it was a really good fit for him. So outside of being a guy that could tackle people in the open field, he probably couldn't do that very well, but he probably would have been a professional catcher
True.
if he wasn't I don't know, that's my guess. The guy's just a winner. You know how to compete.
Speaking of Tom Brady, and not to jump around too much, but because we're on him, a guy like that, and I know that you are more involved in the pro personnel stuff, but the NFL draft's coming up tomorrow. A guy like that who falls to the 6th rounds, and I know it's not so common for these incredible superstars or guys who pan out to be incredible superstars to fall that far in the draft. But what is it? I mean, it feels like the NFL draft is such an imperfect practice. You do all this preparation, all this work, and you have, all the tape and analysis on these guys. And what's the hit rate on guys who pan out and guys who end up not having the career they expect, or teams expect? What makes that so challenging for organizations?
Well, that's a really good question. There's a lot of different ways I can answer it, I think,
Yeah.
but a lot of it just comes down to um, the human will, you know?
Yeah.
So I always try to, with some of our guys that we had 12 guys that went to the combine, right?
Yeah.
So I get kind of the same question, um, from some of those guys that are draft eligible. And I talk with them through the whole process a little bit. But what I used to tell guys that came into our building when we acquired a player, especially a young player, was, look, this is just the beginning. So you may have been drafted in the second round, but there's going to be a sixth rounder on the same position, on the same team that's coming in the same year that's trying to take your job, you know.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different ways that you can take someone's job, you know. One of them is, the playbook better than the guy that was drafted higher than you. You're more reliable. The coach trusts you more to be in the right spot.
Yeah.
You're more professional about how you uh, everything that you do when you come in the building in the morning. Like on time to meetings. The way you communicate on the field. There's so many different areas where you can separate yourself and overcome talent. It's just that everybody wants to make it about talent,
Right.
which is a huge part of it because it speaks to your upside, your potential. But at the same time, it's a very competitive environment, and the makeup of some of these players that overcome, from the as priority free agents or late round draft picks, that's what allows them to grab 53-man spots and
Yeah.
stay in the NFL for a long time. It's their professional approach. So I always used to tell guys, young guys that were into the league, I've seen this happen. I tell them specifically, I've seen this happen over and over and over again. You know, it's about your approach day to day. I've seen guys get their jobs taken. First rounders bust all the time.
Yeah.
It keeps happening. You know, and it's not necessarily because of the scouts. Sometimes it is, scouts missing on guys,
Right.
but it's about human nature. Who wants it more?
Hmm.
It's a hard question to answer. So that's why you'll see certain teams digging a lot harder on background,
Yeah.
like makeup. Who is this person? So they'll do a lot in the as far as background work. Where does this guy come from? You know,
Yeah.
is he how hungry is he? What kind of adversity has he faced, and how did he respond to it? So doing a lot deeper dives on the character, personal character, and football character of the individual that you're you know thinking about acquiring.
Yeah, so these interviews that we keep hearing about, or what happened behind closed doors, Hard Knocks obviously showing a lot of that in their off season
Yeah.
episodes and everything like that. Those, from your perspective and your experience, those actually give a lot more information than just the tape, just the 40, just the arm strength, just that kind of stuff. Like this is the kind of information that you as a scout really need to dive into in order to make sure that you're getting the right individual.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's what do people say about this person in the building?
Right.
Um, whether you're acquiring them from another NFL team or from a college or university, what would other people say about him? Is this guy a leader? And how does he lead? So
I'm wondering now, because you're in the college world. Um, now we're in the transfer portal era, and everything feels so immediate. I feel like, of course,
Yeah.
there's urgency in the NFL, but it seems like organizations and fan bases are a little bit forgiving. You look at the Jets, like, okay, we're kind of trying to turn things around. Maybe it's going to take a couple of years. It feels like in college, especially in the SEC, you got to win right now. So with some of this, and again, this might be a stupid question, but I'm wondering, with some of this character stuff, does that perhaps take a little bit of a backburn approach when trying to get a guy like, hey, we just need this guy for 1 year in the transfer portal, super talented. Maybe there's some issues, but on the field, he's an immediate impact player. Does that come into play at all in this college football world where you're acquiring players, or is it the
Yeah,
same?
that's a really good question. You know, usually before you acquire a player,
Yeah.
even in college ball, you bring him in for a visit and he meets everybody in the building. So that's typically what colleges will do. You
Yeah.
find out a lot about people. So,
Yeah.
it's the abilities of your people to assess the player that you're thinking about acquiring um, come into play as well. You know, so uh, yeah, it is a lot faster paced in the college world. The personnel acquisitions seem to be continuous throughout the year,
Yeah.
whereas in the NFL, you have free agency, which is early March. You have the draft. There's certain uh, time frames, limited time frames,
Right.
structured calendar where you acquire players, and then the rest of the year is preparation for acquiring those players. But with college football, it's a lot more continuous. And the other difference is,
All the time.
player acquisition, you bring in freshmen, right? And then through the rest of the year, you might add portal players. So those portal players are like unrestricted free agents. They're your veterans who you plug in right away.
Yeah.
Right.
Theoretically, your
Right.
freshmen are coming in to sit and learn and develop.
Mm.
In the NFL, it's the reverse because free agency happens before the
Yeah.
draft, right?
Mhm.
So you bring in before you acquire the young green guys that haven't played at that level before, you fill in the UFAs, right? Any UFAs or street guys you're going to sign. You sign some street guys in January and February, and then you do your UFAs and you fill in that part of your roster with those vets. And then the rookies come in. Well, we have it reversed in the college football world. Your rookies are added to the team in the fall of their freshman year, August their freshman year, or whatever. Sometimes we get an early release. That happens first. So it's a reverse. It's just a different approach. But then between that, it's also very continuous. Like with the high school acquisition, it's a continuous recruitment of these players. Even when you get them committed to you, you still don't have them. You know,
Right.
so it's an ongoing pursuit of these players.
Do
They
you,
have to choose you as well as you
Right.
choose them.
yeah. Yeah. Do you see a logical evolution of the wild west of the NIL transfer portal era in college? Do you see a logical evolution of this becoming more like the NFL approach, and switching those two things? Or is it just due to the nature of the recruiting process right now, it's always going to be flipped from that NFL process? Or do you think, hey, NCAA, whomever is going to be sort of managing or hopefully putting parameters on the chaos that is the
Yeah,
transfer portal? Do you see that happening, or just a logical evolution going in the NFL direction?
I think aspects of it,
Mm.
it's never going to mirror the NFL, but I think aspects of it will more and more come into play, just
Mm.
because the NFL is a pretty darn good model right now. It seems to be have been sustained really well over the years, um,
Yeah.
and so I think aspects of it will. One of the things that I thought I heard some teams are starting to do at the college level are putting buyouts into I don't know if that will go through, but just
Mm.
putting buyouts into players' contracts because these contracts are not, they're very short term when you compare them to like the NFL contracts. And NFL contracts are open and shut. The college world, it's not the same, you know. So putting in player buyouts, where so a new team that wants to acquire a player via the portal, they have to buy out whatever it is in their contract. So I don't know if that will be binding, but it's an idea that has been recently thrown out that will hopefully there's a lot of things that I think a lot of the different parties, whether it's the NCAA, the judge that's overseeing this, the conferences, the schools themselves, or the entity that's representing the players, everybody is treading pretty lightly right now.
Right.
For because of legal ramifications. They don't want to box themselves in a corner, I guess, but it's taken a while to play out, to establish anything right now. So hopefully it'll continue to get solidified.
Yeah, I got to get something here because it's kind of the wild, wild west. You're going back to the structuring of your roster here in college. Like Scott, back when you and I were getting recruited for college football, it's everyone that's new to the team for the most part, they're freshmen coming from high school. Now you guys have a combination of acquiring high school players and also players from the transfer portal. How do you try to balance that? What's the distribution like? Or do you try to keep something in mind like, hey, we want X amount of kids coming from high school to come to our program this year, and we want X amount coming from the transfer portal? Or is it just position by position, player by player?
Yeah, I would say it's more position by position and player by player. But we always said in the NFL, we're going to compete in every area that we can. If there's different avenues to make your roster better, and we're not going to neglect any one of them. It used to be, popular to say, "Oh, we're going to build through the draft."
Right.
Well, that's ideal, sure. Because that's more foundational pieces, and you get to keep those guys and indoctrinate them into your program, from their beginning. But the reality is, you gotta be able to compete. It's so competitive that you got to be able to compete in every area of player acquisition that you can. Whether it's looking at junior college players, recruiting high school players, recruiting, players that are in the portal. We got to do a better job. Always have to do a better job, no matter how well we're doing. You got to do a better job of evaluating players and bringing in quality as far as the person and the player. So.
I love, Nick, that you brought up our recruiting process, because funnily enough, Uncle Mike was the one who put together my highlight reel. So a long overdue thank you, Uncle Mike, for helping me get recruited in college.
15
That's
years
right.
late. He has a thank you note in the mail. Back when you had to do DVDs, send out DVDs, the olden days. Isn't that how that's how we did it? Right, you've now then analyzed players at every single different level: high school players to college players looking into the transfer portal, NFL players on other NFL teams looking to acquire. So all of these levels. Is there some sort of traits that really translates through every level of football when you watch a guy on film that makes you know, I like this guy? Is there something that jumps out at you, a trait or a characteristic?
Oh yeah, I think it changes a lot from position to position.
Okay. Let's go linebacker. Let's
Okay.
start off linebacker. What do you like in a linebacker?
Oh geez. So I would say that position more is a lot of it is instincts, so you can fudge a little bit on the traits if their instincts offset, because in a sense they're the field general of the defense, like the quarterback. So vision and instincts are weighted a little bit heavier than compared to other positions. But you like guys that can run. Obviously, I think it's trended in the NFL over the last probably decade or so. where you have more coverage linebackers.
Right.
Used to the days of the Mike linebacker, the traditional Mike linebacker, they're kind of becoming extinct.
Yeah, you get more of the
because that
Fred Warner types now.
yeah, they're involved a lot more in pass pass defense.
Yeah.
So they're required more to do more, run down the seam, play at depth, run sideline to sideline more. So nowadays, it's really hard to run laterally in the NFL because the linebackers are so damn fast. You can't get around the corner,
It's crazy.
So
Well, I love watching some of those guys just chase down stretches. I love that. That's what excites me. Is there any other position? Because I do feel like linebacker, especially at the highest level, has really
evolved.
as you've said, more hybrid guys that can run as opposed to the Brian Urlachers back in the day. Not that he couldn't cover. Any other position you feel like has evolved as dramatically as that in your experience in the last 25 years?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I feel like
think of it. I don't feel like I don't think so. I think a little bit. You don't see quite as many run stopping nose tackles.
Right.
They're expected to rush the passer like the rest of the guys up front. You don't see quite as much of that in the NFL. I would say the quarterback position has evolved quite a bit. The run game is used to be when I first started out. They didn't run. You don't have the Lamar Jacksons in the league as much. Or doing what they did, but then. You still have to win from the pocket at the quarterback position, but that has evolved there. Well, so
I wonder too, piggybacking off of that, do you foresee, say, even linemen in that sort of general physical makeup? Because it went from early on ball, like prior to dad playing, so like call it 70s ball. They were just a little lankier, less heavy, less robust in that sense. But do you see maybe a switch back to that sort of era of linemen because they need to be a little more athletic to block those really athletic defenders that we're just talking about right here?
Interesting.
Like, could that be a potential?
Well, the trouble with that, it's always been sort of a balance that you're trying to establish. That player needs to not only, you talk about just specifically pass protection versus the run game, they have to be athletic enough to front up in pass protection, but also strong enough to anchor. And it's always going to be like that. It's always one or the other, so, when that offensive lineman is setting soft, and he's just a speed guy, they're going to turn and go straight down the middle of him. So, it's about getting faster and it's about getting stronger, basically. So, I think it's always been steadily moving in that trend where we're always trying to get better in both areas, in terms of foot speed and agility, and also the ability to anchor, and in the run game, move people at the point of attack.
As we're speaking about individual positions here, talking about quarterback, you guys at Ole Miss have a quarterback, Jaxson Dart, who is being talked about quite a bit right now. I'm wondering, first of all, what are some of his characteristics or traits that you think might translate well to the NFL? And secondarily, it's kind of interesting. It feels like in the last month or 6 weeks or so, he's really become more prominent in the conversation. And I know we have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow and this weekend in the NFL draft, but you're seeing more and more people saying, oh, his stock seems to be rising. My second question, part of that would be, what aspect of the process makes it that a prospect stock would rise late in the prospect or process like this? Is it interviews? Is it something more on tape? I mean, everyone's had access to the tape, so I'm wondering what goes into a prospect stock rising like this late in the process.
Well, I think some of the, like NFL organizations, a lot of the higher ups, like the general manager types and the player personnel directors, they're just getting around to the fall tape, after the season is over. Whereas some of the college scouts, they were seeing it evolve, or seeing his progression throughout during the season, right?
Right.
So there'll be, it's just an accumulation of information that you see happen between January and now, and so people, um, I think people are realizing that he's a very accurate quarterback. He has a great sense of timing. He can put touch on balls, short to intermediate. He can throw the deep ball, which I heard was a concern going into the season. Should
Yeah.
not be a concern at all, in my opinion. He checks a lot of boxes. He checks a lot of boxes. Um, so, and people are realizing that he is checking all these boxes. You want that person who's going to be basically the CEO of your football team. You want
Yeah.
that person to be able to do it all guy,
Hmm.
which I think Jaxson is.
Yeah, I get the sense like his experience too, playing at a big time SEC school helps in that regard. You know that he's faced adversity at the highest level there is in that level of ball.
Yeah.
And having that sort of experience is a huge plus in a lot of people's eyes going into the draft.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, a lot of scouts and organizations are hearing what type of person he is, what
Yeah.
type of pro he is, all that stuff. Um, and questions are being answered throughout this period, so
Mhm.
that's what's allowed him to rise is just him checking more and more boxes. It's not any one specific box. It's the accumulation of areas or tests that he's passed, in different areas. And I think, from what I've seen from the inside out, appropriately so.
I've been very impressed with him, and both on the field and then watching some interviews of him, he just seems like a really, really solid guy, a good leader, and a great prospect. So I'm getting excited about him.
Uncle Mike, one final question here. It's a little more general. As kids, if any kid is watching this or anything like that, and is just trying to figure out, hey, how do I make it into one, college ball, and then two, potentially the NFL? What would be one piece of advice that you would give to them? Because right now we're seeing a lot of youth ball and youth leagues going into like hyper specialization. Is that something you would encourage, or what would be your word of wisdom for them?
Oh shoot, I think like we talked about, just from the scouting, just evaluating players. You want to evaluate different sports and things, and I think it's no different from the player. I think that having a broad foundation in athletics. Uh, Before I'm always been a proponent of playing different sports.
Yeah.
Because as a scout, my basketball background helps me. And I think it's the same with the player. And it's not just limited to basketball. It's different sports, different competitions. Competing in every area. Uh, because you never know how your body's going to evolve. Tom Brady uh, obviously had like elite processing characteristics. He's that field general. You
Yeah.
never know you know where your talents are going to take you. So experience as much as you can when you're young, I think, and
Yeah.
compete. Compete, because
Yeah.
it brings out the best in everybody.
That's the perfect way to wrap this interview. We really appreciate you joining us. I know you guys got a lot going on with the transfer portal and everything. So appreciate you taking the time.
All right, it's
Thanks a lot, Mike.
great to connect with you guys. Thanks for having me on.